Yo guys, what's good? It's the Tominator, back with another one. Get it? Back. Okay, that was terrible, but nevertheless, the topic of the day is the best backs of all time, in my opinion, of course. This has been discussed ad nauseum in bodybuilding circles, but rarely does anybody make an ordered top 10. Flex Magazine published an awesome top 20 article back in the day. Their descriptions were very eloquent, and it makes for an interesting read, so I recommend you check that out. I'll see if I can dig it up and link to it in the description. But a major shortcoming is that it was written before some of the modern competitors like Phil Heath or Greene stepped onto the scene. I believe around 2008, so it's outdated. And personally, I disagree with some of their picks anyway. Before we jump into this though, I just wanted to quickly explain my criteria and the main things we're looking for here. Number 1 has to be poses, right? It's bodybuilding. So if your back doesn't look good in the mandatory poses, what's the point? Primarily, we're concerned with the back double biceps and rear lat spread. The rear relaxed, Christmas tree pose, and front lat spread were all considered as well, but weren't weighted as heavily. Secondly, we obviously got to examine the body parts themselves, namely the lats, traps, and spinal erectors. This will largely coincide with the poses mentioned above, but sometimes individual body parts are so advanced, so far ahead of the pack, you've got to look beyond the standard poses and check them out from other angles. I've already done separate top 10s for these 3 areas, so you can bet that anyone who placed highly in one of those has a strong chance of making it on this one as well. Alright, so with that out of the way, let's get into it. Coming in at number 10 is Brandon Curry. Okay, so full disclosure, I'm not 100% set on this first selection. Curry's back is great, but there's a number of guys who you could certainly argue were better for various reasons. But I went with Brandon at the end of the day because his combination of width, thickness, and detail is pretty tough to beat. He fills out the lat spread superbly and has one of the best V-tapers in the game. That alone puts him on my radar, but then you consider his effectiveness in the back double biceps? Well, let's just say there's not too many people who can go toe-to-toe with Phil Heath in this shot, but Curry is managing to do just that. Granted, this was a subpar showing for Phil at the 2020 Olympia, and Brandon still can't quite match his definition or muscle maturity, but his traps, width, and lat insertions are all right on par here. Here's a comparison with William Bonac, our first honorable mention. I originally had William making the list, but the more I looked, the more I realized that a big part of his dominance in the back shots is his world-class glutes and lower body. The back is still exceptional, but he lacks the taper of a Brandon Curry. So even if you want to say that Bonac wins this matchup, it's no comparison in either of the lat spreads. On to number 9, where the late Momo Benitez makes his mark. Momo was a bona fide giant killer. In fact, he was one of only 2 men to defeat Dorian Yates in the professional ranks. So whatever the stocky Algerian lacked in height, he made up for in thickness big time. His compact build would have fit in perfect in 212 today. But anyway, the reason I deemed Benitez worthy of the top 10 was the sheer ruggedness of that back double bi. This picture from the 1992 Olympia proves the point, as this would hold up well against anyone in history, take your pick. Of course, the lighting was amazing there also. This comparison with a certain 8-time Mr. O shows the size discrepancy though, which was Momo's main disadvantage, as he was literally getting dwarfed. I believe he was only 5'2" or something. Even so, his upper body detail outstrips Haney's and actually draws the eye more, in my opinion. But the main reason that he ranks so low is because his lack of overall size, and to a lesser extent, width. You hang these massive back muscles on a frame that's 6 inches taller, and we could be talking about a top 6 contender. Okay, and for my second honorable mention, we've got the recently retired Dexter Jackson. Dexter originally made the cut. I feel like his back development is massively underappreciated and just pure quality, with a striated Christmas tree and cartoonish popping traps. The reason I ultimately dropped him though is because his front lat spread was rather narrow, and his back double biceps, well, a solid 8 out of 10, was never exactly cream of the crop either. Johnny Jackson comes in at number 8. So if Dexter's back was underrated, his brother from another mother's was criminally so. I almost didn't even include him at all, but then I remembered, hey, this was the guy with the greatest traps ever, bar none. Almost everyone seems to agree on that, so how could he not make the list? With his powerlifting background, Johnny took thickness and density to a whole other level. Those twin slabs of meat running alongside his spine are almost surely the result of a lot of heavy deadlifting. Off the top of my head, there's only one bodybuilder alive who had this feature without needing to deadlift excessive amounts of weight, but we'll come to him a little later. As for Johnny though, I was never blown away by his back double, which is why he doesn't sit any higher, but those upper traps were simply mind-boggling. His lats were also quite impressive, as seen here in the front lat spread. Here's a nice twisting shot a la Chris Cormier, who represents another honorable mention. Cormier didn't make the final cut, but he deserves some recognition. Like Johnny Jackson, he was a powerful bodybuilder known for lifting heavy poundages in the gym, and it showed in the density of his physique. My issue with Cormier is that he never had the width to truly match all that incredible thickness. He sometimes looked a little narrow in certain poses like the rear relaxed or lat spread, so that's why he fell short. Checking in at number 7 is Samir Banu, still to this day one of the best back double biceps ever, and probably the single greatest Christmas tree of all time. I personally ranked him number 1 there. So why only 7th, you ask? Well, for one thing, Samir's back never looked as outstanding in the lat spreads. In fact, you can barely find pictures of him hitting these poses. Trust me, I've searched high and low, and they are rare. He was also surprisingly lackluster in the rear relaxed, for what it's worth. For another thing, most of Samir's best photos were taken from a single contest, the 1983 Mr. Olympia, which he won. In other words, Banu lacked consistency. I didn't mention it at the beginning, but for all of these top 10 lists, consistency is factored into the equation. It's not the main criteria, but it definitely counts. Even so, Samir had arguably the best back of the golden era, and the remarkable thickness and detail he displayed still holds up well today, almost 40 years later. He was a true pioneer of back development and absolutely cements his spot among the top 10. As for other old school icons, the two most famous ones who preceded him were of course Arnold and Franco. In my estimation, this dynamic duo possessed the two best backs of the 70s, and if this video had been made a couple decades ago, no doubt one or both of them would be featured. Alas, time rolls on and standards evolve, and I would no longer count Arnold Schwarzenegger or Franco Columbu among the top 10. Top 20 to 25, sure, but neither of them possessed sufficient mass to compete with the elite backs of modern bodybuilding. Even so, they both paved the way for the likes of Samir Banu, not to mention this next gentleman, Lee Haney, coming in at number 6. Haney picked up right where Samir left off, winning his first title in 1984 and repeating for the next 7 years. He did so largely on the strength of that back, which was way ahead of the field. Haney didn't have the eye-catching lower back of Samir Banu, but he did have arguably the best V-taper in history, boasting the deadliest lat spreads of his era. His low-hanging lats and upper back thickness would still be good enough to win shows today, assuming he could bring up his legs and arms to modern-day standards. Speaking of low lats, how about this guy right here? We'll get back to Lee in a second, but I just wanted to shout out Sean Ray, my favorite bodybuilder, who gets a special honorable mention, even though I don't think many people would have him in their top 10. But Ray had excellent muscle insertions and some of the finest separation you'll ever see in a human back. While he was criticized for being narrow, especially early on, by the later stages of his career, this was no longer a major issue, as you can note right here with him holding his own next to mass monsters Nasser El-Somebody and Dorian Yates, both of whom outweighed him by over 50 pounds in this contest. Ultimately, Ray falls short for structural reasons. He was simply too small to compete with the best of the best. But Lee Haney certainly never suffered from that problem. One of the most structurally gifted champions of all time, few bodybuilders, old school or present, have ever shown such prominent back development from the front. His front relaxed, lat spread, and even the front double biceps all benefited tremendously from his outrageously beefy lats. If this list had been compiled in, say, the early 90s, it would end right there. But in the past 30 years, we've seen the limits of back development continue to progress further and further. Perhaps none more so than this giant at number 5, Joel Stubbs. I know, many of you are probably thinking, what? Are you kidding, Tom? Number 5? Surely Stubbs is automatic top 3 material. And he was for me at one point too. But the more I really looked, at his available contest photos, the more it became apparent that his legendary status in the bodybuilding community is mostly a mirage. And that's the key qualifier here, contest photos. Not gym pics, not photo shoots, but actual game day contest shape. That's what drops Stubbs down to 5th. Now, don't get me wrong, this dude was still a total beast. Standing at 6'3", his physique was immense, and at that size, he had potentially the broadest back ever. The way those lats unfurled in a rear lat spread, or when standing semi-relaxed, was truly unbelievable. But when you take a moment to examine his back double biceps, which to my mind is the king of all back poses, he starts losing ground fast. The lats seem to wither away before our eyes, and even the traps, while still noteworthy, appear to deflate in comparison to his rear lat spread. If Joel Stubbs had one weakness to his back, however, it was always the spinal erectors. He never came close to matching the lower back density of the all-time greats. You know who we're talking about, but in case not, I'm not going to spoil anything just yet. Even so, when it comes to mass and width, when it comes to sheer wow factor, it's hard to top Stubbs in his heyday. The guy looked like a real-life mutant, an anabolic lab experiment on the loose. Arguably nobody to this day has ever posted a freakier back pic than this. Another bodybuilder in the same vein is Orville Burke, who will have to settle for an honorable mention once again. I believe I had him as an HM for the lats video also, the reason being, his lats attach too high. While this afforded him a very memorable and unique outline, it's not ideal by pro bodybuilding standards. You're generally better off having longer insertion points because it gives you more surface area to work with and more potential for muscle growth. Even still, Burke was a force to be reckoned with. He'd probably be first in line to replace Brandon Curry in that bottom slot, but given his lack of contest photos, I'm not confident that he deserves to overtake the 2019 Mr. O. George Peterson is yet another who didn't quite make the cut. I had him on here originally, and again, he's another name you could swap in no problem, but at this point, I'm hesitant to replace Curry with a 212 guy, and a former classic physique contender at that. George has undoubtedly one of the best backs currently in any division, but a lot of his best photos come from social media, not actual competitions. So while he looks sensational in his own right, I think he'd get a major reality check if he was ever to stand beside a top open class contender. Continuing on, Greene lands at number 4. And if that seems unfair to Stubbs, well, consider the competitive track records and get back to me. Kai might have had notoriously underdeveloped traps, but that's about the only weakness you can find when it comes to his back. His extremely dense and feathered lats are in the discussion for the best ever, and almost nobody brought more overall detail in the back double biceps than Kai at his peak. The thickness of those lats was off the charts. He took what Haney had and brought it to the next level. Here's an expertly timed unflexed photo that shows how insanely dense Kai's back really was. Just look at the depth of those lower lats, man. It's unreal. He also filled out that front lat spread commendably, showing almost no empty space whatsoever under his arms. Here's a one-on-one comparison with Cedric McMillan at the 2016 Arnold Classic, which Kai ended up winning in a close-fought battle. Cedric is another honorable mention, and arguably beats Kai here at his own game. Kai might have more mass and thickness, but Cedric probably has more detail and certainly a more pleasing structure. Cedric also had a great lumbar back and an almost perfect blend of shape and size, but two things prevented his inclusion here. One, he often exhibited a noticeable asymmetry in the lat spreads, with one side flaring out farther than the other. Two, conditioning has always been a wild card with Cedric, and like anyone else, when he's not on, his muscle quality suffers. Going back to Kai, though, here's another one with his former nemesis, Phil Heath, who clocks in at number 3. Yeah, you heard that right. For someone who was actually criticized for having a weak back at the beginning of his career, it's remarkable in retrospect that Phil even made the list at all, let alone top 3. You couple that with short clavicles, and it seems almost impossible, in theory. But whatever Phil Heath lacks in width, he makes up for with thickness and razor-sharp detail. That's been his calling card since day one. Well, that and super round muscle bellies so full they look ready to explode. Anyway, this pose seems close at first glance, until you notice the stark contrast in their trap development, where Phil easily crushes him. This is the main reason why I rank Phil ahead here. You give Kai proportionate trapezius development, and he's a lock for 3rd place. But remember when I said there was one bodybuilder who has a similar twin-pillared look to Johnny Jackson down the center? This is him, folks. Phil Heath somehow displays a comparable effect, despite having never, to my knowledge, done any super heavy deadlifting in his life. I don't really understand it. I mean, I've never seen the guy do rack pulls either. He rarely even did unsupported free weight rows. In the past several years, his training has revolved primarily around machines, as far as I can tell. But I guess that's the power of premium genetics. Phil didn't need to train as hard to get the same or even better results than his peers. His back double bi is arguably the greatest of all time. It was just so balanced, symmetrical, and proportionate, it's hard to outdo that. The main reason he's 3rd, and a distant 3rd at that, is because he lagged behind in the front lat spread and Christmas tree pose, and was simply too narrow compared to the top 2. But before we get to that, let's give another honorable mention to Flex Wheeler. I've seen his name come up many times in these best back lists, and I always wonder why. Sure, he had crazy amounts of jam-packed detail and some gloriously striated lats, but he was so narrow he could make even Phil look wide. The harsh truth is that Flex's back looked pathetic in the rear lat spread, which for my money is the second most important pose after the back double bi. So I'm sorry, but there's no way he's top 10 worthy. Ronnie Coleman lands at number 2. Yes, I'm as shocked as most of you probably are. I've given Ronnie first place at almost everything, and it's no secret that I consider him to be the greatest bodybuilder of all time. I even rated him as having the best back ever in my other video from a couple years ago, where I did a detailed breakdown. So what gives? Well, the reason for this apparent flip-flop is that if you go back to my other top 10 back-related videos, I had Dorian beating Ronnie in 2 out of the 3. The only area that I think Coleman outright overtakes Yates is the traps, and even then it's only because of Ronnie's mountainous upper traps. Yates had the better lower traps. So, by my own admission then, I guess Yates has to be crowned the winner. But not so fast. As I said at the beginning, I'm mostly considering how the back looks in mandatory poses, so let's consider how they stack up in this regard. And remember, we're not analyzing the full body here, it's only the back, so Ronnie's advantage in the biceps or glutes, or Dorian's in the calves, doesn't mean squat. Okay, so without going through a thorough shot-by-shot analysis, which I didn't prepare for and would honestly require its own video, the way I'd sum it up is this. Yates wins the front lat spread and Christmas tree pose. Ronnie wins the back double and rear relaxed. The back lat spread is close, but I'd give it to Yates. Well, I mean, all poses are close. Their backs were both top-notch, no matter the position or angle. But again, I think Dorian narrowly edges him out when we go pose for pose. I will say this though, and it's a major caveat that I made in the other video, that Ronnie at his best is virtually unstoppable. This goes for his back in isolation too. I think an 03 Ronnie Coleman, or perhaps even a 99 or 2001 Arnold incarnation, would be too much for even the very best versions of Dorian. But Yates was definitely more consistent, and unlike Ronnie, who slowly succumbed to injuries and deteriorated, Dorian's back only continued to get bigger and better right up until his final showing in 1997. Make no mistake about it, Yates's back was drier, harder, and sharper, and I'd say he probably had a little more true width than Coleman too. But Ronnie's back was thicker, fuller, and larger. So in the end, there is no conclusive number one. It's more a matter of personal preference, and it depends on what show we're talking about, since they both brought very different looks throughout the years. But for the purposes of this video, I am going to go with Dorian Yates at number 1 for all the reasons just discussed. Before closing, I just wanted to work in one more honorable mention. I realize it's a bit anticlimactic, but couldn't figure out an elegant way to squeeze him in otherwise. And that is Jean-Pierre Fuchs, whose back looked on par with Dorian's in certain shots, like this one from the 1997 Mr. Olympia. Fuchs did indeed look incredible, but the problem is that this was only one show, and you can find many other photos where he didn't look so incredible. So I have to question his validity given this lack of consistency. To be frank, I think Fuchs might have the most overrated back ever, because you always hear his name brought up in best back discussions, but the fact remains that his contest history was minimal, and from the evidence I've seen, he looked mediocre as often as he looked amazing. Okay, trigger warning time, but in my opinion, him and Flex were both heavily overrated when it comes to the back. Both tremendous to be sure, but top 10 material? I don't believe so. Alright guys, so that's going to wrap it up. Like I said, I'm not totally satisfied with this list, but I am happy with the bulk of the selections presented here, although the order is certainly up for debate. Thank you all for watching, and next time in this series, we'll finally be covering the top 10 quads. I know a lot of you have been asking about this one for months now, probably over a year. But in case you couldn't tell, we're working our way down the body, so that's why it's taken so long to get to. Anyway, until then, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Until next time, this has been the Tominator signing off, and I'll be back.